Hello, hello, and welcome to Business Today Television. I am Siddharth Zarabi, and you're watching Easynomics. And with me today, a very special guest, Dr. Surjit Bhalla, former executive director at the International Monetary Fund, and also a former member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Welcome to the show, Dr. Bhalla. I want to begin by asking you to tell our viewers about your most recent article on the liberalized remittance scheme, which as you yourself have said, and a lot of people, seems to have been unliberalized. What really has driven this decision from your understanding, sir, especially because a subsequent clarification said that transactions up to 7 lakh Indian rupees will not be under its ambit?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Look, as I explained in that article, I, for one, cannot find any logical economic reason for imposing this, including that why is it that people, there's a tax deducted at source, which I call a tax on imports, above 7 lakhs. So I don't really think that either should be there. And given that the first one, they've already removed the TDS for less than 7 lakhs, my hope they'll reduce all TDS above 7 lakhs. And indeed, if I may go a step further, that given, India has really performed exceptionally well in terms of financial technology and in terms of tax generation. Indeed, I will soon be writing another piece where, and I had written this earlier, so this is not anything new, that if you look at the aggregate tax collection in India, that is state, local, and central, all taxes, that as a proportion of GDP, we are indeed above and quite significantly above what our peer group, where our peer group is defined as those with broadly the same level of income that we have. Now, when I talk to people, and perhaps you even, they say, oh, our total tax to GDP ratio is 19%. But you know what? The US is 34%. And you know what? Sweden is 52%. So I think such comparison with advanced economies is completely inappropriate, completely incorrect. Just like a comparison with Saudi Arabia's low tax to GDP ratio is also completely incorrect. So you have to compare like with like. Hence, coming back to the original question of why this LRS tax, I don't find any economic justification for imposing that tax.
As someone who has seen policy making at pretty closely, you've contributed to policy making, and your voice is known about a lot of radical suggestions. What would you say needs to be done? Because there's a lot of concern. Some people have called it a regressive move and also a burden in terms of compliance. It just adds, maybe is the 1650th compliance that a lot of Indian business has to comply with, sir.
Yeah. No, look, we have come a very long way in terms of our tax policy. The GST has improved considerably since it was first launched in 2017. And I think there is considerable room for unifying the tax rates within maybe 3 slabs and lowering the tax rate for indirect taxes, GST. Then we did a significant improvement of which we can see the results of lowering corporate tax rates and simplifying corporate tax rates. Another mega advance that this government has been able to achieve. The direct tax reform has constantly been talked about and is really the only remaining item on the agenda, and has been talked about reforming and very actively in government circles and outside of government circles. And that's the remaining leg that we need to um, concentrate on. And I hope that that comes soon, and that when that is taken up, and including, remember, I'd written something on the long-term capital gains tax, of raising that tax. I also don't see much reason for that. So the gift city has come now to India, it was always in India, but basically we are getting the NSE in Singapore is going to move here. So there are lots of, what I'm trying to communicate is there are lots of reforms happening. The direct tax is a reform, is an unfinished agenda. And I hope that sometimes in the near future, the direct taxes will be handled head on. Once we reform the direct taxes, we would have, and given our advancement in financial technology, we should be very proud of what we have achieved. Given that background and that context, the LLS, as I wrote, was really a bolt from the blue. And I personally didn't understand it. And I expressed my views that really neither on getting tax revenue or on compliance or on saving foreign exchange. In other words, what you want whenever you put a tax on imports is when your reserves are in trouble. But we have excess reserves by any measure that you have. So that's all signs of a very good economic performance. And therefore, what are you going to achieve by this LLS tax? Nothing. So that's my honest opinion. And I said in my piece, less than nothing. And I stand by it.
You also said in your piece, and I will cite that the government has attempted a baby first step in modifying the policy to expenditures above 7 lakh. Sadly, nothing will be gained by this restriction. Please do not shoot yourself in the foot. The only mature policy is to forthwith bury the modified LRS policy. Given the fact that it's a consequence of the finance bill and the procedural hurdles, do you see scope for the government to step back and say maybe this was misconceived?
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing, throughout our history, about it, that governments change policy midstream. And indeed, where I would take, there's a silver lining in all of this. They said this will be implemented from July the 1st. And that's more than a month away. So there's, lots of scope. I think the very fact it wasn't implemented immediately shows it was a trial balloon. And I think, that's how policy should be made, throughout a trial balloon, and find out. And if you find out that there really isn't, the balloon isn't flying, you abort it. Nothing lost by any government in changing its mind. I mean, that's what good policy making is you throw out a trial balloon. If it doesn't fly, you change course.
Well, that's an apt analogy to talk about, Dr. Bhalla, because we saw the United States shoot down a Chinese spy balloon, but we are not going into that space. The broader question that arises that for several years after the Vodafone retrospective amendment, India's direct tax policy architecture got a lot of blowback. This government has to be credited with a certain extent of stability, even if some of the more progressive elements of the DTC have not been picked up. Also, lowering corporate tax cuts. Given the fact that it's now political season, we are just about 1 year away when the next central government will assume power. Do you think there is still scope for middle class benefits to be picked up by the government by moving ahead with some changes?
Yeah, look, I very strongly feel, and again, you know me long enough that if I say I strongly feel, it's based on data. It's not based on ideology. It's not based on I think so. That we've done very well on the tax front, and as I said earlier, the DTC remains to be reformed, and taxes remain to be lowered. That is what is consistent with our approach towards both fiscal discipline, increased compliance, and making progress for the aspiring middle class. So it's
That's
lower tax rates. This idea that you lower the tax rate, then, oh my God, we'll lose revenue. We saw what happened with the corporate tax cut. That was the largest corporate tax cut in history anywhere at one stroke. And I remember the feedback at that time, and we soon ran into COVID, but the critics were very joyous. Oh, look, the corporate taxes haven't gone up. So the corporate tax was a failure. Tax cut was so now we've seen how good it was. And and I don't see the normal critics, complimenting the government on a corporate tax cut. So I think there is in our society, as in every other society, there are people who think that you should always raise tax rates because that you will feel morally good, taxing the rich and so on and so forth. And then there's the others who feel that increased tax revenues are good and that increased tax revenues come about from greater compliance. And greater compliance comes about from lowering and rationalizing tax rates. So that's where I come from. We need to raise our tax to GDP ratio, even though it's 19% and much higher than our peers. Obviously, as a sign of a developed economy, we need to increase our tax share so that the benefits, expenditure share can go up, keeping your fiscal deficit broadly constant. Mind you, on the fiscal deficit, we've also done very well. So, that is why I felt particularly upset by the LRS. We're doing so well. And a good sign would be if the government were to cut tax rates and not have TDS on anything. Because of our financial technology improvement, which is acknowledged around the world, including at the IMF. You see their reports, etc. They are asking us to, advise other governments as to how to do it. So, when you have financial technology, that's how the world has changed. The governments have complete information, individuals have complete information, and the room for non-compliance is small. So therefore, one other thing, if I might say, on compliance, in the US, which is most technology, basically a lot of compliance, etc. The compliance rate in the US for individual income taxes has remained at around 82% for the last 20 years. Now let's think about it. What does it mean by compliance has remained at 82%? The US government or US gets only 82 rupees of taxes from every 100 rupees that is it is legislated to get. So, 18% is non-compliance, tax evasion. And, in India, maybe today, and I'm working on that and we'll soon have the results, maybe tax compliance is now as high as 50-55%. From, mind you, in 2002, being about 12%. So our tax compliance has increased fourfold. Okay? We've still further to go, and we've got maybe 20, 30 years to get to that stage. And one method of getting to that stage would be by lowering tax rates.
Absolutely. Lowering tax rates makes sense, and tax policy changes have an impact. The better ones take longer to fructify, and the more regressive ones cause immediate problems. Dr. Bhalla, I want to move on to another item in the headlines, really, which is the withdrawal of the 2000 rupee currency note. The formal process for exchange has started all across the country since the morning, and over the last few days, we have seen various reports on how people are dealing with this. The question to you is about what are likely to be the consequences, broader economic and monetary consequences of the withdrawal of these currency notes over the next 120 odd days.
None, actually, I hope. Look, the notes, it depends how you implement. And again, we've seen that the government is learning from feedback that, you can exchange it anywhere. There are no questions asked. Previously, people were talking about, oh my God, here's another demonetization. Nothing like that. The RBI governor has been quite outspoken coming out with the reasons why this needs to be done, and soil notes and so on and so forth. And this has been, the original plan was to come out with these because of demonetization. Suddenly, you needed to have liquidity in the system, and that liquidity was provided by this. So it was always planned to phase out. And I think that's what's going to happen with not much consequence on the economy or anything else. So I think this will have a happy ending. I mean, it isn't, it was just the announcement and people were unsure, uncertain. And given that we had the demonetization experience before, there was reason for people to be a bit worried. And I don't think there's much reason for anybody to worry. It's working quite well. At the SBI, you can exchange any amount of money, no questions asked. And that's how I hope we go on.
Dr. Bhalla,
yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Bhalla, my question to you is, was this really necessary? And the reason I'm asking you this question is that from a peak of roughly 6.5 lakh crore of 2000 rupee denomination notes in circulation, the system had already sucked out almost 50% of those currency notes over the period from the time of issuance 2016 onwards. It could have conceivably gone down to zero 2000 rupee notes in circulation over 4 or 5 years. And the reason I ask you this is that if no questions are being asked in banks for exchange, and those who deposit are under KYC and the tax net, then where is the question of mopping up any possible black money, sir?
Yeah, good question on the black money. I don't think that there is much scope for mopping up black money through this, especially as you said, no questions are asked. You don't know where it's coming from or where it came from. So I think, the black money problem is a separate problem. And, one other point on all of this, on cash in circulation, etc. And that goes back to the earlier point I made. that there has been considerable fintech revolution. I myself, and you buy it through without cash. So this is, the informal economy is also now operating with less and less cash. So that is why I think that removing these notes from circulation will not have any impact on the economy. That is something all of us around the world actually have to get used to, is that it's a very different world. You yourself would know from your own use of cash or less use of cash. So think of the removal of the 2000 rupee notes as part of that process of having that the economy needs less cash. Unlike, it was just 6 years ago that we had the demonetization. And it was a very different story. That this is the welcome to the brave new world where it's changing very fast. And, cash is not king anymore.
Cash is not king anymore, and pink is the new black. One could also argue that perhaps when it comes to soiled notes, greater attention may need to be paid to lower denominations, which get exchanged much more frequently and in certain kind of activities where the soilage is much higher. But I'll skip that for now, Dr. Bhalla, because I want to take a couple of questions on the state of the economy.
One last thing, and this is pure open speculation. I don't know. I don't know the data. I don't know what that could it be that given that the 2000 rupees were brought in haste, obviously, to compensate for the withdrawal of liquidity, large amounts of liquidity in 2016, that they are easier to forge. I don't know. That could be another fake notes. That could be another possible reason. Now, clearly, no government is going to tell you that there are lots of, fake notes or whatever. So I don't know. What I'm saying is that I don't see much consequence of the removal of 2000 notes as long as no questions are asked. Because that's the rules of the game, and no question should be asked. And if that is the case, then I think there's zero consequence.
And it's an absolutely fair point, Dr. Bhalla, because I also believe that if there is hoarding, this exercise sends out a broader psychological signal that if you hoard cash, then at any time, any government in the future could take action. Dr. Bhalla, on the state of the economy, there will be a temporary surge in liquidity for banks. I expect the entire amount to be deposited, 3.62 lakh crore. So, do you think this is relief for our banking system, which has seen tight liquidity in the recent past, and also due to inflation, has moved to a much higher interest rate regime? Will this be relief? And if so, even temporarily, do you think it will have some positive consequences?
Look, now you're on to my favorite topic on interest rates. I think the last 3 years around the world have been one supply shock after another. And we've had high inflation around the world. And I believe, given that these supply shocks are over, we are going to get before 2020 or before 2019, if you will, in the world. So, I think our interest rates are very high at present, real interest rates, that is. And, you saw the PPI is zero or negative even. And these are all pointers towards a further decline in inflation. So, and therefore interest rates. And then that's a further impetus to growth. Our banking system is in very good shape. NPAs are very, very low. And I think with this further decline, with flush with liquidity in the banks, interest rates will come down. And that's, and again, a big, big positive for the economy and for growth. And mind you, one last thing, that, you know, the Western world has overreacted, as I've written, to the supply shocks, especially now the latest supply shock coming from the war in Ukraine. But, you know, we are seeing signs of improvement everywhere. And if the US and the developed world enters into a mini recession, if there is a recession, it won't be very long lasting. But therefore, all the more reason that our economy is very healthy, and it can become healthier if our real interest rates go down, deposit rates go down, lending rates go down. Win-win.
Win-win. And one quick final point, since you mentioned these reasons, when do you think it is time for the RBI to turn a full pivot as far as rates are concerned?
Well, some of us have been arguing that we moved a bit too much. So therefore, including some members of the MPC. And I think, look, within 3 months, I see a chance for us to lower rates. And therefore, as you would phrase it, move the pivot. But I do think lower rates are there in the offing, both for India and for the US and for the Western world. And that is, you know, we are going through a phase of lower growth, precisely brought about by the extreme reaction in the Western world to, you know, I have likened it to how we always did monetary policy. You know, there was a supply shock, there was a drought. Oh my God, prices have gone up. Let's raise interest rates. That's exactly what the Western world has done. To a supply shock, not a demand shock, they have raised rates. They had inflation, no question about it, but they raised rates in the thinking that raising the rates will lower the inflation rate. Whereas I think the inflation rate would come down as the supply shock receded into the background. As you know, when there's a drought, you imported food, and there went the food inflation. So I think I am very optimistic for world growth next year and onwards, and I'm very optimistic for world growth, for domestic GDP growth in India.
Absolutely. And Dr. Bhalla, on that very optimistic summation of what lies ahead as far as interest rates and growth is concerned, I thank you very much for your time with us on this show. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of Easynomics. If you've been watching, thank you very much. We'll be back with more. Do stay tuned in. Goodbye.
Amazon has announced massive investment plans for India. The Jeff Bezos-owned company has said it will invest $12.7 billion